Harlem, New York. Early winter. The city lights blinked outside Michaela Brown's tiny apartment window like tired stars. It was 2:30 a.m. when she finally collapsed onto her bed, still wearing her wrinkled scrubs. Her tight curls clung to her forehead, damp with sweat from the 14-hour shift she'd just finished in the emergency room. The cracked window let in a chill that bit at her ankles, but she was too tired to care. Michaela had just peeled off her surgical mask and let her eyes flutter closed when her phone rang. The shrill sound cut through the silence like a blade. She groaned, rubbed her eyes, and blinked at the unfamiliar number on the screen before answering. "Mama." "Daddy's chest hurts again," a tiny voice whimpered. Michaela sat up, instantly alert. "Sweetheart, I think you have the wrong number. Who is this?" The little girl's voice trembled. "You're not Mama. Are you a doctor?" Michaela's tone softened. "I'm a nurse. What's happening, baby?" "Daddy can't breathe. He's on the floor. Please help," the girl cried. Michaela's heart pounded. "Where are you?" "I don't know. Our house is white with a black fence. There's a red light in front. Mama wrote this number for emergencies." Michaela's chest tightened. She didn't hesitate. "I'm coming." Still in her scrubs, she grabbed her emergency kit, stuffed her phone in her pocket, and ran out into the cold. Rain was starting to fall. Icy, sharp. Her breath fogged in the air as she slid into her old Honda and hit the streets. She didn't know where she was going, just that she had to find a white house with a black iron fence and a red porch light. Neighborhood. After neighborhood blurred by. Her hands gripped the steering wheel tight. Then she saw it. A white house with a rusted black fence and a faint red glow flickering at the porch. Michaela parked, ran up the steps, and knocked hard. The door creaked open. A little black girl, no older than 4, stood barefoot, her cheeks stained with tears. "You came," she whispered. Michaela nodded gently. "I told you I would." The child led her inside. In the living room, a man lay collapsed on the floor, gasping for breath and clutching his chest. Without a word, Michaela dropped to her knees, opened her bag, and got to work. His lips were pale, his breathing shallow. She reached for an inhaler, applied pressure, and spoke calmly to him even though he couldn't answer. Minutes passed. Finally, his chest stopped convulsing and his breath came easier. His eyelids fluttered and he opened his eyes, confused. "Who are you?" Michaela exhaled, her voice steady. "Your daughter called me. She thought I was someone else. But she believed I could help. So I came." The man blinked slowly, and for the first time in the full light of the room, Michaela saw his face, hollowed cheeks, tired eyes, and something broken behind them. He was no ordinary man. But tonight, none of that mattered. A little girl's desperate hope had reached the right hands, and Michaela wasn't the kind to walk away from a call for help. The living room was dim, lit only by a single lamp that cast long shadows across the hardwood floor. Michaela sat quietly. On the edge of the couch, her emergency bag still open beside her. Outside, the distant wail of an ambulance began to draw near, but inside, everything had gone still. The man, still pale, his breaths now slow and even, groaned softly and stirred on the rug. His hand lifted weakly to his chest as his eyes blinked open again. "You're not from the hospital," he rasped, voice raw and unsure. "Who are you?" Michaela stood and wiped her hands on a towel. "I'm a nurse, just got off shift. A little girl called me, said her daddy couldn't breathe." He frowned, trying to piece things together. "A call? From who?" Before Michaela could reply, the soft sound of footsteps echoed down the stairs. A small girl with deep brown skin, messy coils of dark hair, and tear-streaked cheeks clutched a worn stuffed bunny as she peeked around the corner. "Liana," the man breathed. He tried to sit up again, but Michaela quickly placed a firm hand on his shoulder. "Take it easy." She crouched down to the girl's level. "Was it you who called me, sweetheart?" Liana nodded slowly, voice barely above a whisper. Mama gave me the number before she left. I pressed it like she said. When Daddy got sick, Michaela's chest ached. You were so brave to do that. The man's expression tightened and he closed his eyes as if the word Mama struck something too deep to bear. Michaela looked between the two of them. Your wife, she's not here anymore? Liana shook her head. She's in the sky now, like the stars. Michaela placed a gentle hand on Liana's shoulder and looked at the man again. I think she had my number once. Must have been recycled. That happens sometimes. But you answered. The little girl whispered. You still came? I did, Michaela said softly, because someone needed help. There was a knock on the door. The EMTs had arrived. Michaela stood quickly and opened it, guiding them in with a calm but efficient report. They checked the man's vitals and hooked up a portable oxygen mask. He refused a trip to the hospital, insisting he'd follow up with his doctor first thing in the morning. When the paramedics packed up and left, Michaela reached for her coat. Her scrubs were cold and damp from the rain, and dawn was creeping in. But just as she stepped toward the door, a small tug at her sleeve stopped her. Liana looked up at her, eyes wide. Can you stay just a little bit longer? Michaela hesitated. She looked over at the man, who had managed to sit up on the couch with a blanket over his lap. You've done more than enough, he said, voice softer now. You didn't have to come at all. Michaela met his gaze. Maybe not, but I'm not the kind of person who ignores someone in trouble. He glanced at Liana, then back at Michaela. She doesn't talk much since her mom passed. I honestly didn't think she remembered the number. Michaela gently lifted Liana into her lap. Sometimes the heart remembers what the mind forgets. And just like that, silence settled again. But it wasn't an empty silence. It was the kind that carried weight, the kind that felt like something new was beginning to form. The clock on the mantel struck 5. Michaela had meant to leave hours ago. Her shift had ended long before the call ever came in, and now every part of her ached, not just from exhaustion, but from something deeper. She sat cross-legged on the rug beside the couch, a warm blanket around her shoulders. Liana, now curled up against her side, breathed in soft, sleepy rhythms. The little girl had finally stopped crying. Michaela had read 2 old picture books with torn pages and crayon doodles. She'd found a bottle of milk in the fridge, guessing where everything was by instinct. When Liana's breath caught mid-sentence from sudden grief, Michaela held her close and whispered stories about brave owls and midnight skies until the child's tears faded into yawns. Michaela's fingers gently combed through the girl's tight coils as her little body finally relaxed into sleep. Across the room, the man, still weak, wrapped in a throw, sat on the couch watching them quietly. His breathing was easier now. The worst had passed, he hadn't spoken much, but his eyes never left his daughter. Not once. I'm not sure how to thank you, he said at last, voice low. Michaela looked up. You don't need to. You saved my life. She shook her head gently. I was just in the right place at the right time. He leaned back against the cushions, exhaling slowly. No. You were what she needed, what I needed. Even if it was by accident. Michaela offered a faint smile, brushing a coil from Liana's forehead. She's a strong little girl, she knew what to do. Most grown folks would panic. He looked down. She hasn't said that many words to a stranger in over a year. His voice broke. Not since her mama passed. I've tried everything, therapy, school counseling, but nothing worked. Then tonight, you. Michaela's eyes drifted back to the sleeping child. Maybe she just needed to be the one helping this time. Sometimes that's how healing begins. A gentle quiet returned, one filled with breath and grief and peace. The kind of quiet that settles in after a storm, when nothing is fixed but something is better. After a while, Michaela carried Liana upstairs. The small room had pastel walls, a worn bed, and scattered toys. She tucked the girl in, smoothing the covers and the curls at her temple. She stood there for a moment, just watching the rise and fall of her breath. Downstairs, the man was sitting upright, the oxygen mask now resting beside him. "Could I ask you something?" he said as she returned. Michaela nodded. "Of course. Would you consider coming by again? I don't expect anything. But I haven't seen her that calm since." He trailed off. Michaela didn't answer right away. The look in his eyes wasn't desperation. It was something quieter, worn, honest. She recognized, "I work nights and I have nursing classes during the day." He nodded quickly. "I understand, I do." Michaela picked up her bag. It was a strange night. He let out a dry chuckle. "That's one way to put it." She walked to the door, hand on the knob, then paused. Reaching into her kit, she pulled out a small sealed box and set it on the end table. "An emergency inhaler," she said. "For the next time you forget your meds." "You billing me for that?" he asked with a faint smirk. Michaela raised an eyebrow. "Nah, but I might stop by to check your pulse, free of charge." He laughed softly. Not loud, not perfect, but real. And for him, that was everything. Michaela stepped outside into the gray hush of dawn. The street was still, bathed in a soft orange glow. As she walked to her car, she glanced back once at the little white house with the red porch light. She didn't know what came next, but she knew one thing for sure. She would return, not out of obligation, not out of pity, but because something inside her, something she hadn't even realized was still alive, had quietly said, "Stay." The next morning came quietly, and just like that, a new rhythm began to take shape. One Michaela hadn't expected but didn't resist. She began visiting the little white house with the black iron fence and the red porch light. Always around 9 a.m., before class. Always, with something small in hand. A warm muffin from the bakery down the block, a coloring book, or a fresh pack of markers for Liana. The little black girl would press her nose to the front window and wave furiously as Michaela pulled into the driveway. Noah, because by now she knew his name, watched from the kitchen, always quiet, always with a cup of black coffee in hand, his face unreadable, yet not unkind. Michaela never stayed long at first, just an hour, maybe two. She would read with Liana on the couch, pick up toys left under the table, and remind Noah to eat something other than takeout. She never pushed, never pried. Yet with each visit, she wove herself deeper into the quiet spaces of the home. Not loudly, just present. One morning, Liana grabbed her hand and tugged her into a small corner of the living room where a few art supplies were scattered on a tiny table. "Look," she said proudly, holding up a crayon drawing. It was 3 stick figures, one tall, one small, and one with yellow braids in the middle. "That's you," Liana said, pointing to the middle figure. "You're holding me in Daddy's hands, so you don't get lost." Michaela's throat tightened. Later that afternoon, when she went to grab tea in the kitchen, she found a handwritten note beside a steaming mug. "Thanks for not getting lost." Noah. That evening, after Liana had gone to bed and the soft stillness of the house returned, Michaela and Noah sat on opposite sides of the couch. A nature documentary played on the TV, whales perhaps, but neither of them watched. "Do you ever miss it?" she asked suddenly, voice low. Noah looked up. "Miss what?" "The boardrooms, the title, being the boss." He chuckled dryly. "I used to think I was important, that what I built mattered." His eyes drifted toward the fireplace. "But after Ava passed, I couldn't walk into that building without feeling like a fraud." Michaela listened. It was supposed to be a routine procedure. She even laughed that morning when I dropped her off. I signed the forms. I kissed her goodbye. And a few hours later I got a call, but it wasn't to say she was in recovery. Michaela's voice dropped. "I'm sorry." Noah shook his head slowly. "I hate hospitals. I hate the smell, the white walls, the silence after something goes wrong. I hate that I trusted the system, and it couldn't bring her back." She didn't respond, because sometimes silence is the only answer that fits. In the days that followed, Michaela felt the lines between her life and theirs start to blur. She wasn't living in that little house, but it began to feel like home in a way her apartment never had. She knew where the cereal was kept, which shelf Liana's favorite books sat on, that Noah liked his coffee strong with exactly 2 sugars, that the hallway light near the stairs buzzed if left on too long. And yet, she didn't belong there. Not really. She was just the nurse who'd answered a wrong call at 3 a.m. Still, something inside her stirred every time she stepped through that door. One afternoon, she lingered in her car longer than usual after leaving. Her fingers rested on the steering wheel, unmoving. Her chest felt tight, not from stress or sadness, but from confusion that swirled like fog. This wasn't her family. This wasn't her life. That night, she pulled out her phone and opened her email. She typed a short, simple message to her nursing supervisor. Subject: request for personal leave. Hi. I'm requesting a few days off to reflect. Nothing urgent, just need some space. She hit send. No explanation. No second guessing. Just a gut feeling that she needed distance. Not because something had gone wrong, but because something felt too right. The next morning, Michaela showed up at the White House with an envelope in hand instead of a book or toy. I need a few days, she said softly to Noah. To think, to breathe. He stared at her for a moment, the silence between them heavier than usual. Then he nodded. Okay. Liana came running down the stairs in her slippers, arms open. Are we reading? Today? Michaela crouched and kissed her cheek. Not today, baby. But soon. I promise. As she stepped out and walked down the porch, Michaela felt an ache spread through her chest, like she was leaving something behind that she hadn't meant to care about so deeply. It wasn't love. Not yet. But it was close. Back at the hospital, everything should have felt familiar. The buzzing monitors, the white noise of rolling stretchers, the endless pages over the intercom. Michaela had walked these halls for years. She knew every turn, every smell, every shortcut to the supply closet. But now, it all felt foreign. The walls echoed differently. Her scrubs clung too tightly. The light was too bright. Her hands moved with practiced skill, but her spirit wasn't in it. Something inside her had shifted, and nothing fit the same way anymore. 4 days had passed since she stepped away from the White House. It should have been a relief. But instead, it felt like she'd left a piece of herself behind. During her lunch break, her phone buzzed. It was a message from Liana's kid's tablet, the one Michaela had helped Noah set up. A drawing appeared, 3 crayon stick figures again, one tall, one small, and one with golden brown braids in the middle. Underneath were clumsy letters. I miss you. Michaela stared at the screen. Her heart felt like it had been punched and held still at the same time. A moment later, another message appeared. This one from Noah. Liana hasn't been sleeping. She thinks you left because of her. No emojis, no follow-up, just honesty. Quiet and painful. Michaela locked the phone and stared blankly at the vending machine across from her. The hum of the hospital continued as if nothing had happened. But inside her, something sat silent and unmoving. She didn't reply. Not yet. Instead, she took a walk around the courtyard. Headphones in, lullabies playing, soft as memories. She sat on a bench beside the old stone fountain, watching brown leaves float on the water's surface. She let the cold air bite at her arms, let it remind her she was still here. She'd made a vow long ago, never to become a placeholder in someone else's grief, not a stand-in for a lost mother, not a crutch for a broken man. She had seen it happen too many times in her line of work. She would not be someone's escape hatch. Not again. And yet, she couldn't forget the way Liana smiled when she traced stars on the ceiling. The way Noah's voice sounded that night in the kitchen when he whispered, "Thanks for not getting lost that night." She didn't text. She didn't call. Instead, she opened the kids' audio app and recorded a short bedtime story. Her voice was calm, steady. Tonight's tale is about a brave little fox who got lost in the woods but never really walked alone. She didn't mention names, didn't explain. But Liana would know. And somewhere in that small white house, Noah listened too. In the dark kitchen, tea gone cold, his elbows on the table, he played that voice again and again, as if her words were the only thing keeping him from breaking apart. By the 5th day, Michaela stopped checking her phone every few minutes, but the ache hadn't left. It had only sunk deeper, like a song stuck in the chest. She tried to refocus on work, on charts, on patience, on everything she used to care about. But none of it lit the spark it once did. Her hands still healed, but her heart felt off balance. On the 6th night, just past midnight, her phone rang. Not a message, not a drawing. A call. Noah. She answered before the second ring. "Liana's sick," he said, voice raw and tight. "Fever won't go down. She's been crying for hours. She keeps asking for you." Michaela didn't hesitate. She was already reaching for her coat. "I'll be there in 20. Rain smacked the windshield as she sped through empty streets. Her heart beat fast, not with fear but with urgency. When she arrived, the red porch light was on. The door opened before she could knock. Noah stood there, shirt wrinkled, eyes swollen from worry. He didn't say anything. Just stepped aside. Liana lay on the couch, curled under a blanket printed with cartoon stars. Her curls were damp with sweat. Her cheeks flushed, her breathing uneven. But when Michaela knelt beside her and gently touched her forehead, the girl quieted. "You came," Liana whispered, her voice small and hoarse. Michaela smiled softly, brushing back a strand of hair. "I told you I would." Noah stood in the doorway, his arms folded tight across his chest. He didn't speak, but his shoulders eased, like a man who had been holding up the world by himself. And finally, someone had stepped in to carry the weight with him. Michaela stayed beside the girl all night. She wiped her forehead with cool cloths, measured her temperature every hour, whispered stories about starlit animals and magic forests until the girl fell asleep against her shoulder. No one had to ask her to come. She was already home. The air inside the little white house was warm, but Michaela's fingers trembled slightly as she reached for the thermometer again. Liana had finally drifted into a light sleep, her small frame buried beneath the cartoon blanket, cheeks still warm from the fever. Michaela sat beside her, watching every breath, every twitch. Gently, she brushed curls from the girl's damp forehead, murmuring words too soft to name, words that felt more like prayers than comfort. In the kitchen, Noah was a storm in slow motion. Cabinets opened and slammed shut. Bottles clinked. His voice cracked through the tension. "Where the hell is the acetaminophen?" Michaela didn't even look up. Her voice was calm. "Cabinet above the fridge, right side." Noah paused, then moved. Beat later, the bottle landed beside her. No words exchanged. They worked like a team, quietly, like they'd done it for years. Like the rhythm had always been there, just waiting to be remembered. The fever dropped slightly. Not gone, but better. Still, Michaela didn't leave. Not even when the silence grew long. Not when the house stilled again. When Liana finally settled into deeper sleep, Michaela rose and stepped into the kitchen. Noah was seated at the table, both hands wrapped around a mug of untouched tea. His eyes were heavy. His body slumped forward. He didn't look up when she entered. Michaela poured herself a glass of water, then leaned against the counter. Her voice was clear. "I didn't come back for you." Noah looked up, startled. "I came because a little girl was sick. Because she called out and I couldn't ignore her. That's it." Noah didn't argue, didn't plead. "I know," he said simply. The silence between them grew again, heavy, fragile, full of things neither of them had the courage to say. Then, Noah reached into the inner pocket of his coat. He pulled out a folded piece of paper and slid it across the table toward her. Michaela glanced down, puzzled. The letterhead read, New York State Medical Board, Physician Reinstatement Application. She blinked, then looked up. You? He nodded slowly. I never told anyone. Before I became a hospital director, I was a trauma surgeon. I left everything after Ava died. The OR, the board seat, all of it. I didn't trust myself to help anyone anymore. Not after her. He didn't say more, he didn't have to. Some truths don't need details. Michaela's fingers rested gently on the form. You're applying to return? Not in a fancy office, just part-time, a clinic, somewhere real, somewhere that matters. Her heart tightened. She met his gaze. You don't need me for that? No, he said, voice low. But I wouldn't have remembered I could still be that man. If you hadn't come. Michaela turned away, biting her lip. He stepped toward her, not close enough to crowd her, but close enough for her to see the exhaustion behind his hope. If you ever feel ready, he said softly. Don't just come for Liana. Come for you. Come for what this might be, if you let it. Michaela didn't answer. Not right then. Instead, she walked back to the living room, crouched beside Liana, and gently stroked her tiny fingers. The girl leaned toward the touch even in sleep. Maybe she had come for the child. But maybe, just maybe, she had come because a part of her missed the feeling of being seen, not as a nurse, not as a fixer, but as someone worth staying for. Michaela stayed until the sky turned lavender and the city lights blinked out one by one. She left quietly before sunrise. But this time, her steps weren't those of someone walking away. They were the steps of someone who might come back. 1 year later, the neighborhood looked different to her, not because the buildings had changed, but because she had. Gone were the endless overnight shifts, the beeping monitors, the fluorescent hospital lights. She had traded antiseptic and burnout for something quieter, something hers. Michaela now lived in a small one-bedroom apartment, above a local bakery just 3 blocks from Noah's house. The apartment was modest, mismatched chairs, sun-faded curtains, but for the first time in her life, every piece of it had been chosen. Each morning, she unlocked the doors of a once-abandoned garage, now converted into a community first aid classroom. Inside were child-sized mannequins, colorful charts on how to perform CPR, shelves of bandages and stethoscopes, and a whiteboard that always read, today's lesson, learn to save a life. Liana was always the first to arrive. Now 5, the little girl would burst through the door with her curls in a wild ponytail, backpack bouncing and a grin stretching ear to ear. Coach Liv, she'd call out proudly. I checked Daddy's blood pressure this morning, he's fine. Michaela would pretend to gasp. Well, Nurse Liana, you've earned a promotion. Junior medic, effective immediately. The other kids loved her, but none more than Liana, who insisted on calling Michaela Coach Liv instead of Ms. Brown. Noah claimed it was her way of keeping Michaela all to herself, unique, different from everyone else. And he wasn't wrong. Noah had started volunteering too. 2 mornings a week, he showed up to fix shelves, unclog sinks, and bring those organic, gluten-free snacks Michaela would smile at and secretly roll her eyes over. He never overstepped. Never pushed, but he stayed. Then, one Saturday morning, Michaela noticed a child's note pinned to the bulletin board. Drawn in purple crayon, it read, Today is the day, Liana. Michaela smiled, confused. She didn't realize what it meant until that evening. The local community center was hosting its annual awards night. Neighbors, teachers, nurses, firefighters, anyone who had made a difference were being honored. Michaela hadn't planned to attend. She preferred quiet corners to applause. But Noah gently insisted. So she went. The auditorium was packed, warm with laughter and the hum of chatter. Michaela sat in the back, nervous, her fingers laced tightly in her lap. Then she heard her name. She looked up. Liana, dressed in a white blouse and a blue skirt, stepped up to the microphone. She was so small the MC had to adjust the mic. "My name is Liana Campbell," she said softly. "I'm 5. The room fell still. I used to get really scared at night, especially when my daddy got sick. But then I met someone brave." Michaela's heart stopped. She came to my house because I called my mom, but she showed up anyway, even though she wasn't my mom. Liana paused. Her voice didn't shake. "She's not my mom, but she's the person I want to be like most when I grow up." For a second, everything was silent. Then applause thundered. Michaela sat frozen, her eyes brimming with tears. A hand slipped into hers. Noah's. He didn't say a word. He didn't have to. His fingers laced with hers, firm and steady. Michaela turned her face, back toward the stage, tears sliding down her cheeks. It wasn't a proposal, it wasn't a kiss in the rain. But it was something stronger. It was the quiet promise of something real. The sun hung low over the backyard, casting soft gold across the white picket fence. A gentle spring breeze rustled the leaves of the tall maple, and the scent of fresh cookies drifted through the open kitchen window. There was a stillness in the afternoon air, the kind that makes you stop and realize you're exactly where you're supposed to be. Michaela sat cross-legged on a checkered blanket in the grass, a warm mug of chamomile tea between her palms. Her golden brown curls shimmered in the fading light. Across the yard, Liana turned cartwheels barefoot, laughing so hard her giggles floated like music. Her joy was loud, unapologetic, free. Noah sat on a nearby bench with a book in his lap, though he hadn't turned a page in 10 minutes. His eyes were on them, on Michaela and Liana, on the life unfolding in front of him that didn't ask for anything more than presence. It had been over a year since that 3 a.m. call. Michaela wasn't just the nurse anymore. She was the rhythm of their days. She was the peace between storms. "Hey," Liana shouted from across the grass, grabbing Noah's phone and pretending to speak into it with dramatic flair. "Hello? Is this the nurse lady?" She burst into giggles, flopped down beside Michaela, and held the phone like a walkie-talkie. "Dad, if somebody calls the wrong number again, what should I say?" Noah smiled. "Tell them they reached exactly who they needed." Liana nodded, serious for a moment. "Okay, I'll say that." Michaela reached over, brushing a leaf from the child's curls. The gesture was small, but her heart clenched. In that moment she knew. She could never go back to who she was before. Noah stood from the bench and crossed the lawn. He knelt beside the blanket and pulled a small wooden box from his pocket. Simple, worn smooth at the edges like it had been carried a long time. He placed it in Michaela's hands. "Open it," he said quietly. Inside was a silver ring. No stone, no flare, just a small engraving on the inside curve. Answered at 3:00 a.m. Michaela looked up, eyes wide, lips parted. "I never planned to love again," Noah said, his voice steady. "But that night when you showed up without knowing who I was, exhausted, no promises, just action, you didn't just save my life. You stepped into it like you were always meant to be here." Michaela said nothing. She didn't have to. She closed the box, leaned forward, and pressed her forehead to his. A quiet exhale left his chest as if something inside him had finally been released. Then Liana squealed and threw her arms around them both. "Group hug," she shouted. "Forever team." Michaela laughed, the sound warm and full, tears slipping down her cheeks as Noah held them close. No wedding vows. No big declarations. Just a child, a father, and the woman who showed up when nobody else did. As the sun dipped behind the rooftops, the three of them stayed right there, entwined, rooted in a love that didn't come by blood, but by grace. Courage, by the choice to answer when no one else would. Sometimes love doesn't knock at the front door. Sometimes it rings at 3 a.m.